You know, I should get one of those fancy like intro videos for the live streams. Anyway, welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, September 9th, 2024, and this is episode 948 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's a Monday, so it's our usual segments of a Monday show. This is the original format that we had before we went from once a week to 3 times a week. We were up to 5 times a week at one point and then dropped back down to 3 times a week because frankly, y'all told me you weren't keeping up anyway, and it seemed like a better use of our time to focus in on what you really wanted to hear about. Today is a show about tactics, and the tactics we're going to talk about are 5 tactics that I basically came up today with some help on how to beat inflation. Because we're all navigating an inflationary environment. We have been for years. It looks like it's not going to slow down anytime soon. And, we're going to go beyond stop buying frou-frou coffee and move on to discussing this from just 5 things I think you can consider, organize around to start moving positively through the inflationary period. There's nothing you're going to do to stop it, right? So you might as well organize your life in a way that makes you more durable through this time. And it's not just about how to do things cheaper. This includes some of that, but also there are other aspects of this problem that are pretty important. So I would say the other side of the coin, but it's not a two approach method. It's a 5 approach method. I'm sure I've missed some stuff. So I'm really looking forward to what sort of discussion this elicits from y'all. Hello, Haas. Welcome to the live stream. If you're on the live stream and want to get a comment or a question in, just put the word comment or question in all caps and then write it. I will star it and work it into the show as much as I possibly can. Okay, before we jump into that, though, I wanted to talk about our featured event of today's show, and it's the October 3rd Fight Hacker Escapology class with Sonny Puzikas in Camden, Tennessee, right before the Self-Reliance Festival. This is basically a self-defense class, right? Okay, yes. But you know what Sonny Puzikas does that's pretty darn cool is he comes at it from a yes, this is how you can get out of situations, this is how you can dominate situations, but he also is keenly aware that if you're not where the fight is, you don't necessarily get as hurt. Even if you're a really good fighter, you risk getting hurt if you're in the fight, right? So he calls it escapology for a reason. He has a second workshop that is the art and science of de-escalation, which is a whole nother thing you can do on Friday. But on Thursday, we're doing more of the physical stuff. Now, if you are in a wheelchair, you can still take this class and get benefit from it. If you're horribly out of shape, you can still take this class and get benefit out of. If you're afraid of being around people and talking about self-defense and all those things, you need to take this class so that you know what to do if you come upon an unexpected situation that could turn or does turn violent. That's over at selfreliancefestival.com. There's also a link in the show notes. Our first sponsor of today's show is EMP Shield, empshield.com. Okay, so empshield.com has been supporting my show for years now. And if you want to get the best device that I can find on the market to protect your home from surges and all sorts of electrical things, empshield.com is the place to go. And it's more expensive than, say, like a surge protector from whatever it is, Square D or whatever. But here's the thing. They have a guarantee. If it fails, they replace your appliances up to $25,000. If you use the coupon code LFTN, then you get $50 off, which is better than 10% off, just for context. Now, and that's another thing I appreciate about them. If they're listening, they know why. Okay. The reason I brought it up in today's show is inflation proofing yourself or navigating inflation isn't just about doing things for less or making more money. It's also about setting up your life to be more durable and making good decisions about the things that when you choose to build them into your life, you put good ones in, like you put higher quality. That's why I have been talking about EMP Shield, even though I'm not a big EMP attack sort of person, because their product's just really good. Check it out, empshield.com. Also, I do actually have one in my house, so I'm not just making that up. The Wealthsteading podcast with John Pugliano. John Pugliano's been supporting me since before I had sponsorship, and he's he's helped me with the coffee business, all sorts of stuff. And he is an investment manager, like a money manager. But that's not what's supporting us. What's supporting us is his podcast where he talks about openly how he makes investment decisions. You can listen to these episodes and increase your financial like savvy, but also you can learn how he makes decisions. And I don't know, I just think it's really cool to invest time in making yourself better intellectually if you're not in an investment place. And if you are an investor, it helps to learn from other people who invest. That's the wealthstudyingpodcast.com. Homestead Made Easy. Welcome to the live stream. We do have several live streams this week. I added one today that Letty didn't know about, so it's not on my weekly blue image because that went out yesterday, and I started this process yesterday, but we hadn't really like settled on which day and which time. I'm going to be doing a live on Sunday, so next weekend at 6 p.m. with Toolman Tim Cook and Spags. And we're going to talk about, well, we just haven't caught up in a while. So we're going to talk about self-reliance. We're going to talk about building the life that you want to live. We're going to talk about prosperity. And we're also going to talk a lot about Self-Reliance Festival because I realized when we talk about the festival, it's like there's speakers, there's vendors, there's sponsors, there's demonstrations, there's there's dinner, there's there's a lot going on. So we're going to kind of talk about our favorite things about the festival, and that'll help me in a couple ways. One, if y'all have questions, that's a good time to ask questions about Self-Reliance Festival, and we can like talk about what the camping's like or talk about what the kids program is. But also, it helps me get little shorts that I can use just promoting the festival. So lots of reasons to check that out. And it's going to be a fun show. It's always fun with those two guys. Friday at 9:30, Homestead Happenings with Tactical Redneck. And tomorrow, really special show. I've got CJ Kilmer from the Dangerous History podcast and Sean Mills. We're going to talk about probably, so CJ's had a really, really tough year. And he has navigated it really, really well. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I'm sure we'll talk about what he's seeing as far as things happening in our culture from his perspective, historical. He also has another really long episode on Woodrow Wilson out, which you should totally check out, Dangerous History Podcast. But that's tomorrow at 9:30. So we'll have our coffee chat in the morning. You got to check it out. Okay. With that, it's time for the first segment of today's show. Haas says, crazy, just last week, $92 to fill two plastic grocery bags. Yeah, so I don't grocery shop much because I'm a homesteader. And what's going to happen later in the show is I'm actually talking about things you can do not from a hardcore homesteading standpoint, but remembering what I was like when I lived in the city and went grocery shopping and went out to eat and met my friends for drinks and walked places instead of drove places and had a little scooter in Portland, Oregon. That's right. Very different life I lived there. So I think people in that situation were hit sooner, harder by the inflation than people who are not as participatory in the quote unquote normal everyday way that we live. But there are many, many, many of us who live the normal way. And that's, if that's the way you want to live, that's totally cool. This show is not about not living that way. This show is about being purposeful about the life you live so that you live the life you want to live and not live the life somebody else wishes you would live because that's what they want for you. Because that's how you get unhappy right there. Right. And our whole system is set up to kind of shoehorn us into a specific way of living, which some people really love, but not all people love. So you should just live the way you want to live and you should have fun doing it. Because when you get to the end of your life, you're not taking anything with you except for maybe the experiences you had. So make them good. Okay. Tales from the Prepper Pantry is our first usual Monday show segment. And that's all about storing what you use and using what you store. And living in the country, sort of ultimately you develop this skill because it's not easy to go to the store. And if you're always bipping out to the store, you spend way too many hours in your car. And that's pretty much how I developed my pantry management skills. So it started with like, can I grocery shop once a month instead of like a couple times a week? What happens when I run out? Can I figure out how to use something else? Like that sort of thing. And I also always wanted to source like super high quality stuff. So I was part of like these shared buying clubs that existed here that don't exist anymore and that sort of thing. So it was just a natural fit of homesteading. But even if you're not a homesteader, having a means of rotating things through your pantry and having that savings account of supplies and food is really awesome, especially if things go horribly wrong. Like, oh, I don't know, the economy gets completely shut down because of a virus, and suddenly the things that you used to get at the grocery store once a week aren't there. But luckily, you have 6 months worth of those things, and you were just going to refill so you can like kind of wait it out from the supply chain side, right? We we changed our way of eating a lot here to where it's more of a ketovore existence. And that meant that a lot of the stored wheat and things I had like that haven't been what needs to be stored in my pantry. And over the last few years, I've been using it up when people come who use these sorts of things. And my mom does eat wheat and grains and crackers and pasta and all that stuff. So when she's in town, when Mama Sauce is here, that stuff gets used. Well, over the last few years, we've really transitioned away from that and then made more space for what we eat, which is a lot of fresh vegetables and meat. And in order to store the meat the way I like it the best, we have deep freezers. And I have 4 deep freezers now because I'm not just storing for me, I'm storing for event food, I'm storing for 2 households, plus extra stuff that we like. I have a dedicated freezer to meat that we produce and sell. And we are not selling meat right now, but we're about to be again because it's about time to process some rams. And I wanted to make sure that whole reset was done, right? So I started a freezer audit months ago, about a month ago, and just resetting all of that. And luckily, because things got a little chaotic, Tracy, holler neighbor Tracy, came over and did most of the work, frankly. So we deep cleaned all of the freezers. I actually still need to unplug some of them again and like vacuum out the coils because if you do that, your freezers last longer and it's more efficient. You use less power. So we did the final push last weekend, and it's all done, and everything is back the way I like it, which means the pork's with the pork, the beef is with the beef, the chicken's with the chicken, the lamb's with the lamb, the pre-prepared frozen meals are with the pre-prepared frozen meals, and then random ingredients like I have some blueberries, I have tallow and lard all in one. I keep it in the freezer until I use it. Like all of that stuff is organized, and I'm down to 3 of my 4 freezers, and if I process tomatoes, which I think I'll do this week, I'll be down to 2 freezers. And that's not, like, super exciting because I like to have freezers full, but when I know I have cows and sheep coming into my freezers, it's really nice to have empty ones, and I've had, like, pork in Nighthawk's freezer from when we processed 4 pigs at one time. We had pork in everybody's freezers for a long time, and then they can eat it too. Um, I'm getting the last of that into the freezers, so we're like, whew, back to a more balanced approach here. But because of that, of course, we find things in the freezer that we forgot were there, even if we were pretty good at managing inventory on that. And I realized that what's been happening is people have been handing me tongues and hearts from cows for like a year because they don't know what to do with them. And truth be told, I've never cooked a cow heart until yesterday. I've cooked venison heart. I've cooked chicken heart, but I've never cooked a cow's heart because I always get to it and I look at it and I'm like, I don't want to deal with it. And I give it to Nighthawk and then he cooks it and I eat some. So yesterday I was like, okay, this cannot stand. Like, I can't be here like showing people how nose to tail cook. You cook the whole animal, like all of that stuff. When like the 2 things I haven't cooked are heart and kidney. I'm not looking forward to kidney because it smells like, it does not smell good. But we'll see. I'll give it a taste. I don't typically like how organ meats taste. Heart is different. Tongue is different, right? Like a heart is basically a very lean steak. It's not like livery flavored or anything. It doesn't have that like extra woo. Um, I can make myself eat liver, but I totally can taste liver in things, and I really don't like how it tastes. And I think that's because maybe it's an iron thing. It may be an iron thing. I don't know. I feel like there's a physiological reason why. It's not just like, ew, I don't like liver because I told myself I can make myself eat liver. I just don't like how it tastes and I don't crave it. That being said, I did a live stream this weekend because I promised y'all I would, and it was all about how I was preparing the heart. I've never prepared a beef heart before. I also stated on that live stream that I don't promise that the way I trimmed that heart was the official butcher way. But what I did is I took all the silver skin off the outside or whatever that outer skin was, cut out tendons and fat until it was just meat. And then I cut it into strips crosswise to the grain of the meat. and I dry rubbed it and I flash seared it so that it was rare, which we like rare or medium rare here, and served it as steak strips. And it was delicious. I would say my only critique of the whole thing is I used cumin, and it was fresh ground with my mortar and pestle. And what I didn't realize is you've got about a 10x increase in flavor on the cumin when it's freshly ground versus the ones you buy in the store that are pre-ground. So I would use about 1/10 of the. It was a lot of cumin, and everybody liked it, but I was like, "That's too much cumin." They're like, "Yeah, it's good." It would like we would taste the heart more if we didn't taste all the cumin. So today I took what was left over and not eaten. So we fed 3 humans last night. 2 of us eat like normal people, and one of us eats a lot. And he's the skinniest among us, but he is the tallest. He usually eats enough for 2 to 3 people. I would say he ate enough for 2 people last night. So we fed 3 people last night, and then today I had leftover like steak strips, and I cut those up and folded them into scrambled eggs, and that fed 2 people again. I have the smaller pieces of heart strips that I'm going to turn into a beef stew, and I've got all the trimmings in the crock pot right now making the broth for that. So that will at least feed 1, if not 2 more people for another meal. So that's pretty good for a beef heart. And a beef heart is something that I often source for free. So I like looked up how much they cost. It's really hard to figure out how much they cost. So like I know from a top-notch organic in the city highest end farm to table place how much it costs. But I'm like, if I just go and I buy a beef heart from Albertsons, how much is that? I'm just curious. And then like knowing that people will throw hearts, tongues, and livers at you all the time who buy whole animals, like that's a source. You can just put out like I eat beef heart and hearts will show up. I eat beef tongue. Like I've done more than one homestead drug deal in a parking lot with tongue and heart and liver because people got cows and those parts came with it. And they were like, well, I don't want to waste it, so I'll take it. They find out I eat it, I get them for free. So that was kind of cool. We're collecting a lot more herbal tea items right now. So just doing one last round. But at some point, we'll have our first freeze and things will become, no longer ready for me to collect them. And I am doing a canned good reorganization just to get ready to completely gut the mudroom. The prepper pantry is gutted right now. I need to get drywall done in that, and I figure I should do the mudroom too and do the drywall for both rooms because I will hire in the work of the drywall because nobody I know likes doing drywall, and so they'll do it and they'll let me pay them to do it, and or I can work on it, but none of us like it, and it's one of those things I just pay for because we all hate it so much. So other than that, the prepper pantry roof is all redone. Ken got that all like dried in and closed up to the outside. And now what we need to do is figure out all the wiring, make sure that's all how it needs to be. And we're moving the freezers all to one side. And then we're building custom shelves on the other side after the drywall and paint's been done. And I believe we're going to skim coat the floor, which is concrete, with some more concrete to make it level because it is not currently level. It's got like most of my house, it was built in iterations, and so there's like several like heights or times that concrete was put in there. So we're just going to try to make that all one thing. So I could pour self leveler there. I don't think we will. And there's one strip down the middle that's just cut out and it's a trough. And I asked Tactical, like, do we need to leave that open or do we also concrete that in? Because that used to be the access for the HVAC to get to ductwork in the house, but there is none of that anymore. Like the heating and cooling is done by mini split. The way those ducts were put together weren't really good for heating and cooling. So it's all been changed around now. Anyway, that's the deal with the prepper pantry. We had a lot going on in the prepper pantry the last couple of weeks. And we also have to close the transition from the prepper pantry to the attic because that's how you get rodents. And we do not want rodents having any access at all to the prepper pantry. Next up, we have the weekly shopping report from Joe. And Joe says that the price of a 2x4x8 remains at $365 at Home Depot. And that leads me to a lumber. Somebody, I think it was in our social networks, was discussing that lumber is lower because people aren't building as much right now. So despite the fact it's really hard to contract with somebody, there's also not as much building as everybody thought there would be. So there's more supply because people ramped up when we were doing like the big boom after the shutdowns. And so prices have come down, and what will eventually happen is mills will go out of business or stop producing as much, and then the price is going to come back up. But right now they were saying we're in a low point. Now I haven't gone back and looked at all the data to verify that. I'm throwing that out because if that's true, then now's a really good time to get lumber. So do your own research. But if it is, and you have a project in mind, I can tell you this: when I built Taj Mahal, and Ken Ash told me he couldn't do it for like 6 months from when I wanted it, like when the idea came up to when it happened, I ordered all the lumber then because I knew that lumber was going to be more expensive, and it probably would have cost me twice at least what it cost me if I had not done that. So if you know we're at a low for lumber, it's not a bad time to just, as long as you have somewhere to store it, get going for a project you're going to do. They also went to Aldi, which had some of their canned cat food back in stock, as well as a new brand, which totally happens at Aldi all the time, that they just sort of switch over to a new vendor. And they found everything else they wanted. There were they were out of watermelon, which wasn't on their list this week. And that's maybe a seasonal thing, I would think. Staple prices were as follows. Bread was $1.39. Eggs are $3.77. That's getting close to the $5 a dozen I charge for chicken eggs. That's up a lot from last week. Whole milk is $2.92, also up. Heavy cream is holding steady at $5.39. Orange juice is $3.45. Butter $3.99. Bacon $3.99. Potatoes $3.59. Sugar $2.99. Flour $2.35. And 80% lean ground beef is up to $4.39 a pound. A gallon of untainted regular remains at $3.59.9. I kind of wish I had poured a glass of water before I started this podcast now. You guys are going to have to excuse me while I cough. Woo! Sorry about that. I usually water up. I don't know why I didn't. And if it gets really bad, you're going to have to watch as I run out of the studio and grab some water because there's nobody here to bring it to me. Next up, we have a frugality tip from Margot. Margot says, "Hey, all. After talking to someone recently, I realized there was a problem. Some things that are second nature to some, but unfamiliar to others. This week's frugality tip is using media mail with the post office. If you're mailing books, movies, or educational material, you can send them via media mail. Maximum weight is 70 pounds, and it's $4.13 at the time of this writing." So if you don't know this, the post office increases their rates with very little notice all the time, and it's really super frustrating if you use them for shipping coffee. Just throwing it out there. But don't put anything else in the package. They can and will randomly open media mail packages because some people have tried to skirt the system and mail other things. So send a book to someone and save a few bucks by sending it via media mail. Happy savings, y'all. And also, you're not supposed to include a letter with the book. I think that's part of the issue. So that's really true. If you need to mail books around, you can do it for super cheap. Tori says, "I found some 2x4s on Marketplace for $2. They aren't all straight, but the project didn't need perfectly straight." Yeah, so that saves a little bit there. Nicole, do you have a spreadsheet for the lumber prices you've been mentioning all these months? If not, I'd love to put that into a spreadsheet. No, I just remember because I have to buy lumber all the time for stuff. And so, like, when it was $13 for a 2x4x8, I cried a little bit while I bought them because I needed them. And we were very careful about exactly how many 2x4s we used in something, but now it's back down. But before we started, they were $2, around $2 for 2x4x8. So we're still not quite double, but we're up, 30-40% on 2x4s. Yeah, craziness. Next segment, and our last segment before we start talking about inflation proofing your life, is Operation Independence. And Operation Independence is where we talk about one of my personal goals, which is building local ongoing revenue into our lives here so we're more stable. Because when I first started this podcast, I was overly reliant on one source of income. And that meant that contract had more power over me and over my decisions than I wanted, because the goal here is to make my own decisions, right? So since that time, I've built multiple streams, and multiple relationships. And that doesn't mean I don't enter into contractual arrangements with people and we do things, but not any one of them dominates. And that's been a really positive change for me. And I also think it's really important to develop ways of deciding if you need to pay a guy for something versus doing it yourself. Because when you do something yourself and don't outsource it, you don't pay taxes on the money twice. What I mean by that is I earn money and I pay taxes on it. I hire somebody to do drywall, they earn money and then they pay taxes on it. And that's sort of like a double tax situation. Like every time we pay for something, there's taxes being taken out, which means more money, more of my money is going to support programs I don't support. Right? So the less and less I can do that, the better. But at some point, like with drywall, it's not worth my time. Like the ROI on my time is not there. And so I do, in fact, earn money, pay taxes on it, pay a guy who pays taxes on it to get drywall done. So we used to track a lot more carefully what I call the independence fund. And the independence fund is that delta between what I pay for something and what the taxes out of it are when I've learned to do it myself. Or um, sometimes it's a bigger number. It's like what I would have paid was like, for example, I replaced my own breaker, which I'm allowed to do because it wore out, and that cost me my time about 20 minutes plus an hour worrying about it, and a part, which at the time was 40 or $50. It would have cost me $200 to get an electrician all the way out here to do that at the time. So I put $150 in my independence fund. And it was like this fictional bank account of I took an action. So now that's $200 we didn't have to earn, plus the taxes on top of that $200. And for that, it was about $50. So that's the independence fund. And I don't track it as closely as I used to. When I first started this, it was a household conversation. How much did you add to the independence fund when you chopped that wood instead of buying firewood? How much did we add to the independence fund this week by hanging our clothes out to dry instead of paying for propane to dry the clothes, right? Things like that. And there were a lot of little things. And the whole idea behind it was to develop habits that made us weigh the benefit versus the cost before doing something, and seeing how that works into our lives. And at that time, I had a lot of debt. And one of the big goals was no debt because the money to service the debt was just too high. Anyway, that's the big background on Operation Independence and why we talk about it every week. And I'm saying that because I got a lot of new listeners, and I thought y'all might be interested in the backstory because it's just sort of been like, this is the segment we have every single week, right? So that single beef heart yielding 7 meals is pretty slick, considering that we get it free. And that's all I got to say there. I'm not going to go beyond, like, that was a pretty long explanation of what Operation Independence is, right? So now it's time for the main topic of today's show, which is, for those of you who are new today, I do an audio podcast, and that's what we're doing here, is recording an audio podcast. And you get to see it live on the internet, which means if you have questions or comments, you can write the word question or comments in all caps, and I will integrate it into the show as long as it's not absurd. I will ignore absurd. That's just what I do. But we're going to talk about 5 tactics to beat inflation. And this goes back to, there's been a lot of chatter on our networks about the pain people are feeling, in particular when they buy groceries. It's not the only pain, like everything's gone up, but the grocery pain seems to be the most like painful, because if you can't eat, you can't function. Like when I was thinking about this the other day, like the hierarchy of what we pay for in our lives, right? It's most important to have enough to eat. That's more important than shelter. We're going to, your health is really important too, by the way, because that's what you have a foundation from which to do all the things. And then you have shelter. So notice that none of those are internet or cell phones or cars or anything else. It's like those things are pretty important. And then when we get into modern living, then you're like, okay, maybe the power is important, or having some way to heat, right? Maybe not power, but definitely having some weight. Like, so if you heat with wood, you're good. And then maybe you're going to add power. So as you start listing in order of priority what's important, A, you realize what you have in your life that's less important. And B, you understand why people are like, man, groceries are too expensive. Because it's just a fundamental thing that we need to survive. And food, especially having reprogrammed most of the population to not understand how food is created, means that there's a dependency there. That's probably why when people go into sort of self-reliance and preparedness, they end up homesteaders. And that's why when people get to understand Bitcoin better and get really into Bitcoin, they become homesteaders. And I think it's why a lot of people in the free market policy movement have gardens and have started homesteading. I've met so many people from the free, like from my free market past. I'd be out there and they'd be like, "Yeah, we raise, goats for milk." And I was like, "What? Like you're all here in your three-piece suit, like giving your presentation in wonky wonk, mish mock wonk, and you have a homestead? Really?" So there we go. And Rachel would like to point out that half y'all need to slap that like so that we can get more attention to this live stream. Thank you, Rachel. You don't want to piss Rachel off, man. I believe she's going to be in person at Self Reliance Festival. She might slap you in the face. Just saying. If you don't slap that like, I'm just extrapolating that from the word slap that she used in that comment. Anyway, so as I started thinking about that and thinking about inflation and watching people worry and thinking like I had a shock earlier this year when I was traveling and had to actually buy food, that I was like, "Oh yeah, no, 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 no. I just spent $150 on food and I'm walking out with like this, and it's like a bag or two bags. It was hardly anything." And and I was like, "Okay, I knew it was bad." But then when I started really looking at like a year, because I have receipts, because sometimes when I buy groceries, it's for catering events. And so I can be like, well, for the event last year, it was half as much. And it's like, oh my, they say we're up 20%. We're up 100. We're up over 100% on groceries. If you're buying actual groceries that real people use, which is different than whatever it is they're tracking for your groceries. I don't even know. It's just, it's kind of funny how that happens. So the five thing, and I actually, like, I had things in mind, but I wasn't as solid in what I thought I was going to tell y'all today until I sat down with some really smart friends and had a conversation. And I did that on the TSP Zello group, which Zello is an app you can use on the phone. It works like a walkie-talkie. And the Survival Podcast has one. It's TSPC, I think, out over there. And you can, like, there are many different ones that have TSP there, but there's one that's the official TSP one that if you're looking for people to talk to with words, it is a pretty cool little community. You can check it out. But if you've been to my events and met some people like Leos, who's doing the blacksmithing demonstration at Self Reliance Festival, or Oxy, who works in the kitchen for my Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop, I met them through Zello. And Oxy is one of the most like smart people about being frugal that I know. She's been putting out a series on TikTok about how to basically eat 2,000 calories a day and do it on $4 a day at the grocery store. And so she's been putting out some videos about that with specific meal plans that are not terrible. It's not varied. Like you're eating the same thing every week for a month if you do that. But once you get 4 or 5 meal plans out, you actually can rotate those things, right? Which is kind of cool. And it doesn't seem to have been much of a stretch for her. And she's trying it at different stores. So she's going to do it at Walmart next, I think. But she did it at Sam's Club. She did it, I think, at like whatever her local grocery store is. And she is allowed to clip coupons if she finds them. So she does include that too, which is how she builds some of these meals. So I said, these are the things I'm thinking of from a actions you can take standpoint to beat inflation. But let's go big picture first. So they like refined it and we talked back and forth and Sarah was on there. It was a really good conversation. But big picture on beating inflation, it's not just about getting stuff cheaper. Cheaper, 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 cheaper doesn't serve you. Here's why. If you look at how our economy has worked over the last 100 years, by nature of how we've prospered and how we've gotten better and more efficient at doing things, everything's cheaper. Like, I'm looking at this switch. Like, this electronic device 20 years ago would have been thousands of dollars, and it's like a couple $100. So that's been sort of like the natural downward price pressure that happens as we optimize what we're doing in a market society. But what has happened because of how our monetary system is set up is things that should really be almost free are not, because inflation, right? The way inflation has happened, like, that's the government robbing value from you by printing money. That's what's happening. So inflation is a necessary part of what's happening in our life if we are in a fiat money system, which we are. And it's a reality you can't change. Like, you can call for, going back to the gold standard all you want, but we're not there. And you can say Bitcoin's going to save this and change the world, and if, that's great. Learn about Bitcoin, learn how to integrate it into your life, all of those things. But the reality is, today, right now, in the US, using US dollars, paying for things here that have to be paid in specific ways, inflation's happening. So rather than fight inflation, it's a good idea to figure out how to navigate it, because you're navigating it. And I have the good fortune of being born in the 70s, so I watched my parents navigate it then. And I saw the stress it caused, and I saw steps they took to get through that successfully. And I watched other people do it less successfully. But you know what? Everybody got through it. Well, not everybody. Most people got through it, and it wasn't the inflation per se that made it so other people didn't get through it. Like, I think maybe the month after my grandparents retired, ready to retire for the rest of their lives, they lost about 50% of the value of their retirement savings, and they still had a very long, very cool retirement. They just didn't have as much money in it, and they did have to take side jobs during their retirement, like picking apples for people and stuff. Yeah, I said what I said. They picked apples, they put roofs on, they did little side projects to help augment things, but they also did some things to navigate the inflation. So I see it as it comes from multiple sides. There's the push down how much you spend on things. There's the you need to increase your money side. There's the you need to be in a position to be able to do those things. So you have to take care of yourself and your family. There's a lot of different things. And here are the 5 things. The first one is a mindset thing. And this is, take the long-term view on necessary purchases. Now, when you need something and there's absolutely no way to live without it, and you don't have enough money to get the best one, you get what you can get, right? But step back and take a long view and ask yourself, do I really need that? A really good example of this, I know somebody whose cook stove broke, and she was in a time of eliminating debt, college debt, and some other debt. And to replace the cook stove with a new one would be about, four or $500. And the used one was going to be $150 in her market. And they were on a specific budget, and their budget did not include replacing that stove, even at $150, right? So they decided to do the hard thing. And part of the reason they decided to do the hard thing wasn't that they couldn't give up some other part of their budget and figure out how to get a used cook stove, but it was to confirm what their priority was. And their priority was to do things methodically for almost a year. She cooked with other appliances in her house that she had, grilling outside on the grill, using the crock pot. I think she may have had an air fryer. I don't know, like maybe an Instapot. Like, she had different things already that she could use. And for the whole time she cooked. And when they paid off their debt, the first thing they bought was a new range for their house. And she was like, I get to bake turkey for Thanksgiving for the first time. Like, this is awesome. So, um, that's what I mean by taking the long-term view. Sometimes you absolutely just have to buy what you can buy to get it done. Like, I just bought a $6,000 truck to drive because my car was totaled and I did not have transportation. And the way I have my life set up, I'm not taking the bus from here. So transportation and like, stable transportation is sort of important. And you can get that in a variety of ways. I did not go out and buy a 60,000 brand new Toyota 4Runner, which is what I really want. But I didn't do that because that would put me in debt. Even though I know the long term payoff, a 4Runner that's sort of newish right now is a good choice if I'm going to do that. Right. So that's what I mean by take the long term view. So for me, the long term view is I didn't want to finance a $60,000 car or a $50,000 car. And I had enough saved up in the emergency fund for the truck that I bought, and the rest would work itself out. And I can A, keep my eye on the 4Runner market, and B, you know, assess it within the context of all of my long-term view priorities. Likewise, some things we'll talk about today require infrastructure to support the money savings aspect. Well, what do I mean like by that? I'm going to tell you to buy half a cow if you eat beef and you're going to finish half a cow or a quarter cow. Where are you going to put that cow? Because it won't fit in your little fridge freezer. So if you have space for a deep freezer and you eat meat and you want to buy a quarter cow, you need a freezer, right? So last year I had to buy a freezer because a freezer broke. And the long-term view is I'm tired of my appliances breaking after a few years. And then they break often in a way that it's like almost as much to buy the part as it is to buy the freezer. So Tactical had been doing a bunch of research on this because he was pissed off about it. And he found a freezer that I could buy that doesn't have a computer. And you can source parts for it. So it's more mechanically built and less electronicsy built. That freezer was about maybe $300 more than a reasonable, like Frigidaire sort of Whirlpool-y brand freezer of the same size. So then we were like, man, it was not in the plan that the freezer was going to break that quickly, but here we are. And we have all this pork and like stuff. So what are we going to do? Are we going to buy the one that's more affordable or not? And I was like, okay, so in the grand scheme of my life, a freezer that lasts 15 or 20 years, that's $200 more, that I can get parts for and fix most things on it, makes a lot more sense to me than saving $200 this month. So what can we cut that out? So the long-term view was get the mechanical freezer, not the electronic controlled super duper awesome freezer that has all the bells and whistles that then break and the whole thing doesn't work, right? So we spent $200 more. And he and I do share costs of the food storage because it's basically supporting both households. So that's likely to last twice as long. And then the second thing is, and this is something that helps you. So that long-term view is important for beating inflation because you have the stored value of the item lasting a long time. And what happens in inflation is replacement cost goes up every single time. That's what happens. So, your $500 freezer is now $1,500. And that hurts more if you're doing it every little while. And if you don't have to constantly rotate those things because you buy the cheaper one, then you're in a better long-term financial position in that you're keeping money you would have spent on that. Okay. Second, extending the life of those things that are necessary. That's part of the long-term view. So this is things like maintaining your car, rotating your tires on a schedule, vacuuming out the coils of your deep freezer to make it have a longer life and use less electricity because you don't have dust buildup on that. Getting those things into a schedule makes a huge difference just as far as managing the time, but also keeping the items nicer for longer. And I will fully admit I am guilty of not sticking to the maintenance schedule, but it's one of those times that like sticking to the maintenance schedule is important. And I've got a related comment here from Tori, who didn't put comment in all caps, Tori. Okay, so you're lucky I saw it. I only buy used washing machines at Habitat or those rebuilt appliance stores because they're easy to fix. The last machine I had replaced because the part wasn't worth it to fix. Yeah, so I've gone through a lot of washers where they break so bad that you can't fix them. And I have a 1980s era Whirlpool, I think, right now that was left behind at a rental property of mine by somebody who just didn't want to deal with moving it. And it uses more water than like the modern washers, and it has an agitator in the middle, so it gets my clothes clean, unlike the more modern washers, right? Tori just said, sorry, I wasn't really mad at you, by the way. I was just using you as an example to encourage everybody to do that, Tori. So, the only brand of washer I would buy right now is a Speed Queen because it uses water and you can replace parts on it and you can fix it and it's built durably. And I think it's the T2, but I'd have to double check. Like, same thing. Did a whole bunch of research on washers to figure out which new one I would buy. And there was one specific model of the washer done by Speed Queen that has the best longevity, doesn't have computery parts, like all of it. So you don't get the one that has the digital display. Nope. You get the one that has the it's a basic one, but it's freaking expensive. It's, for a washer, when you're like, I'm going to go spend a couple $100 on a washer, it's like you're going to spend $1,300 to $1,400 on that washer if you get the Speed Queen. So that's the same thing. Long-term view. Do I want to do what Tori's doing? Rotate through some used ones that are repairable in favor of the ones from the 80s, like and earlier, if you can, or am I going to get a new one and spend the more money for that, which will also last probably a very long time, especially if you're willing to repair it. This also brings up the $5 frou-frou coffee problem, where people are like, not getting my Starbucks isn't what's going to make me, get out of debt or inflation proof me. And I'm like, okay, when people give that example, it's not about the coffee. It's about a small decision made every day adding up to a lot of money. And it may be coffee for you. It may be lunch burritos. It may be, I don't know. I don't know what people buy that's like kind of frivolousy stuff. Like, what it is. And, having one coffee once in a while from a Starbucks, no big deal. Or if you want to build in an everyday Starbucks to your life, that's fine too. But if you're in a situation where you're feeling the crunch at the grocery store, it's a good idea to look at all of those little habits. Smoking cigarettes, that's another good one. Or drinking alcohol, really. You're buying all of those things. And if things are tight, then look at that and decide, where is that in the hierarchy of what's important to me. And a lot of what I'll talk about today is deciding what's important to you and getting rid of things that are habits or habitual because they make you feel good in the moment. It's like a dopamine payoff to get that $5 Starbucks coffee. Right now, I buy coffees from coffee shops when I'm on the road from time to time. I actually usually try to organize myself so I don't have to do that much, but I'm not going to not buy a coffee in Austin, Texas when I go down for the Exit and Build Land Summit if I want a coffee. But I don't have my week set up to spend $5 on coffee 3 times a week, which is $15 a week, which is $700 and something dollars a year, which is a lot of grocery money. Now, that $700 is not going to pay off your $20,000 debt, but evaluating every habit like that will. And if it's really important to you to have a nice coffee, then I'm spending $800 on coffee, right? And the espresso maker you want is maybe $400, which is a lot of money for the thing. And it will take 5 to 10 minutes to make that espresso at home in the morning. So I have to get up a little earlier, except for how long does it take at Starbucks? 5 to 10 minutes is not out of scale. So it might not really, right? I can buy nice coffee from Holler Roast, of course, and make myself a frou-frou coffee every morning. And I have paid for that machine in 1 year, plus sourcing the coffee directly whole bean from a craft roaster. Any craft roaster, doesn't have to be Holler Roast, but it totally should be if you listen to this podcast. It will free up that fund, and I've set up a new habit of still enjoying the one thing that's important to me without it being super, like, like without it costing as much. And then it's a little bit more inflation proof, right? And you've learned a skill. So then coffee is just the easy example for me because that was actually one of the first changes I made when I decided to pay off debt. It wasn't that I was getting coffee 3 times a week. It was that I thoughtlessly bought coffee whenever I wanted it. Because I worked from home, I wasn't around coffee shops as much, but I would like purpose for coffee, go out, buy coffee, and come back. And that's like all of the time, all of the gas, buying the coffee for what? For what? And then I figured out I can buy $250 awesome espresso machine and make it at home. And it took me like 3 days to figure out how to make espresso the way I liked it. And that's just improved over time as I've done it more. Um, that item for you exists. The key is you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. That's one I got from Jack Spirko. And it's important to know when you choose something like I have a ridiculously over technical, awesome espresso maker here. People stop at my house when they know they're driving near it just to get espresso from my house on their way through, who know me really well. I had to decide not to have something else. You'll notice right now I don't drive a super nice car. That is a complete purposeful decision I've made because it's just not that important to me. And the people who judge me because my car is not nice enough, therefore I'm not indicating that I'm successful, are wrong. But it's the choice I've made. And if they judge me that way and it negatively impacts me, then they're probably not the people I need to be working with because they don't know me well enough to know why I'm driving the car I drive, right? So once you've figured out what that thing is, what you do is you ask yourself the next important question. I told you we're talking about multiple sides of inflation proofing. How can you turn your long-term view into a side hustle? Now, I know people who source appliances, to Tori's point, broken that people are giving up for free, change the part and resell them. And they guarantee for like 30 or 60 days and they deliver them to your house. I know somebody who was making thousands of dollars a month that way. Thousands, right? But that's just one idea of a side hustle. I could probably sell coffees to people who stop for coffees here if I wanted to. Or I can start making videos about how to make coffee at home so that you don't have to go to Starbucks and then have affiliate links for all that stuff and then go from there. So you can side hustle that. And then you're working on the other side of the equation, which is in an inflationary time, you need more money coming in. You need to do your best to keep up with it with your investments, with the assets you keep, and with your income. Because as much as getting things more frugal in the home really helps, if your income doesn't keep up and inflation keeps happening, eventually you reach a time where it ain't cool. So always be asking yourself, how can I side hustle this? Especially if you have time for a side hustle, right? There's a point where you have some side hustles and they're taking your time and they're doing what they need to do. So of course, make your decision within that context. But people are always asking me like, how do I choose my side hustle? I'm like, well, yeah, start one. And it probably starts with something you love. I had no idea I would have a full-time job roasting coffee for people and shipping it all over the country. When I started roasting coffee in a cast iron skillet because I decided to roast my own coffee because the coffee I could get in Tennessee wasn't good. And I figured out I could get green beans and start roasting coffee, and then people liked it. So, yeah. Tori says, wait, where does the washing machine side hustle guy store all his machines? In the garage. And he fixes them and he posts them and they sell because he posts them at a price that is enough for somebody to want to buy it quickly. So he doesn't have a lot of backlog. You know, you're talking 5-10 machines in a garage. Totally works for that person. Okay. The second tactic is one we talk about on this podcast a lot because I just like doing it. Now you might not be a person who likes doing this, so you may have to figure out another way. Jack's Bourbon Cold Sumatran Coffee is the coffee of the month for October, and I will have it at the Self-Reliance Festival for sale in my booth. Just FYI, and we're going to probably sell out of that really fast this year based on how many people keep hitting me up about Jack's Bourbon Cooled Sumatran coffee. I'm pretty sure AJ Harrison is going to buy it all. Right, AJ? Anyway, he did tell me that's his favorite one, and I'm definitely bringing him an amount of that he will have pre-ordered. Anyway, from scratch cooking. And I really wanted to write from scratch living here, but let's start with cooking because cooking is easiest to get your head around. And we're talking like this is oriented not towards those of you who are hardcore, I'm going to eat a beef's heart, right? Just start by learning how to cook a steak and not buying a steak at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or wherever. You can make better meals at home for less money, more nutritious, and more enjoyable than at most restaurants. And the restaurants that can cook better than you will be able to learn how to cook are going to be $200, $300, $400 a meal restaurants in most cases. Which means most of the restaurants that most of the people in this country go out to are mediocre at best, and it's a convenience thing, I think, or it's a social thing and not a this food is really good thing. So, it can cost more to cook from scratch. Full disclosure, especially if you're doing super complex thing. But do you eat bread? Bake it. Now, the bread you bake from ingredients you source at the store probably costs more per loaf than the cheapest Wonder Bread you can get at the store on sale. You're comparing apples to grapes basically there. And the Wonder bread is the grape, just for clarity on the analogy there. If you compare the bread you make to an artisan loaf at the store, you come out way ahead. Same with tortillas. You can make homemade tortillas. And I start with the carb side of things, even though I don't eat carbs, because a lot of transition, like people who are ready to transition and try cooking from scratch, are still eating a standard American diet. And you can start making a lot of the things that you buy at the store, like cookies, for less, and they're better. And they're better for you because you start by cutting out a whole bunch of preservative crap that's in there. Like if you look at the ingredients in a loaf of bread at the store, you're like, wow, I just used flour, eggs, and water or milk, and a little bit of honey or sugar and yeast. 5 ingredients, and I've listed some ingredients there that are not absolutely necessary to the creation of a loaf of bread. Salt, 6, right? But it makes it way better. So some people add oil. Some people don't add eggs. Some people don't add salt. I like to put salt in my bread and use unsalted butter. That's just how I work. It's because I lived in Germany and their bread is saltier than their butter and it's delicious. Next time I go to Germany, I'm totally eating bread again. So start there because that's something a lot of people eat. You can start with rolls for dinner or whatever. Like look at what you eat and then ask yourself, what can I do from scratch? The other part of this is how often do you grab something for lunch or dinner from a place? Like takeout, right? Or going out to eat, or I forgot to pack my lunch. And it's sort of like I didn't plan, so now I'm spending money on this thing, and it's good, and it's hot, and it's now. Can you pre-make those sorts of things and replicate the ease at which you did the eating out and get more bang for your buck? We keep grocery store cauliflower crust pizzas in the freezer, which are less than buying a pizza, and they're cauliflower crusts, so that's one of our goals. We keep those here for a convenience food because that stops us from going to the marina and getting Mexican, right? And I watched with interest a big debate on my community Facebook area about Subway not taking coupons anymore. And Beth says, I'm glad I have a chicken roasting in the oven. Yeah, start dinner soon enough and you end up with the thing, right? So the $15 foot long, 15 feet, would that be a very long sub? Anyway, Subway has a $15 Subway sandwich right now. So it's $15 to buy a Subway sandwich at our local Subway, and they aren't taking coupons. And they are individually owned franchise. They don't have to take coupons. and people are losing their minds because it's $30 for 2 sandwiches. Well, I happen to know because I was sick in August and I actually ate 4 sandwiches, and those 4 sandwiches, I went out and bought everything. I bought the bread, I bought good bread, like, it wasn't the cheapest I could get. I got the most expensive, awesome cold cuts I could get. I bought deli cheese, not, like, specific, like, cheapy cheese. I had to buy mayonnaise because I didn't feel like making mayonnaise. I had mustard and pickles at home. I bought cream cheese for it, and I made these sandwiches, and I got 4 sandwiches for $18. So for $3 more than a single sandwich at Subway, I got delicious sandwiches, and that's 4x what it costs to get it at a let's just be honest here, mediocre fast food sandwich place. So what can you do to make, like just having the sandwiches if you keep going out for lunch and you eat sandwiches makes a huge difference. And you can like put an apple with that and you're like starting to eat a little healthier, right? Rather than the chips. Um, Pre-made burritos in the freezer that you can microwave. I know somebody who used to once a month make like 20 burritos and just grab a different kind of burrito every day on the way out the door. Boring, I know, but if you get more ideas like that, then you have the convenience of when you were just going to go out to eat covered, and that really pushes down on how much you're spending on food. Make your own spice mixes. You will get better quality spice mixes, and you don't have to buy these tiny little bottles for like 6 or 8 or $10, right? You can buy them in bulk, make your own bottles ready to go. I keep them in mason jars, and I make some of my own. I source some of mine from a local person I know who makes spice mixes, and that's Honeybee's Kitchen. That's Melissa White. Her spice mixes are great. She sources really high quality ingredients, and you don't have to use as much when it's high quality versus low quality spice. A lesson I just learned by getting unground cumin, right? I've never seen it here. And then I was like, yeah. So, like spending $5 on this little packet of cumin, like that's cumin for at least a year for me. So there's that. Wherein I was buying like the big giant ones. So we're very likely gonna just start doing the unground cumin for that reason because it's better value, right? And it means I have to take a mortar and pestle and do this for a second before I use it. Or I can get a spice mill. I have one somewhere in a box. I just don't know where it is. And so I've been doing it by hand. And then the most important part of from scratch cooking is okay, everybody who's a perfectionist in the live feed, say me. Tori, I'm looking at you right now. I'm like literally looking at Tori. Anyway, um, there are a lot of us who want to do something. We want to do it 100% perfect, and we have high standards. And that is how we get things done well, by the way. Like, that's not a bad thing. Homestead made easy, not me. So, with the from scratch transition, you have to start where you are and make one change at a time rather than try to do everything from scratch all at once. Like I'm making my own laundry detergent and my dishwasher detergent and soap from scratch. And I've made my shampoo and I'm cooking everything from absolute base ingredients scratch. I'm making my mayonnaise. I'm doing my bread. I'm making tortillas. I'm, whatever. I don't even know what else. I'm making scones, whatever it is. That's a lot. That's a lot. I'm growing my vegetables absolutely organically and canning every single one of them. Everything that we have in our house is going to be from our house, and that's all there is. Yeah, I want to live like that too, but I don't. I have chosen the things from scratch that work best for me by assessing the things I use. And there's another element we'll talk about later that helps me through this. But start where you are and make one change at a time. So if you're one of the people who grabs lunch 3 times a week, start with that. Don't worry about eating out at dinner. Start with lunch. Get your lunch in order. Have a habit of making your lunch and having convenience foods ready to go. And then address the eating out. Eating out becomes really awesome when you don't just eat out because you forgot to make a plan for what was for dinner. Because when you eat out, you've chosen to go out to eat and it's a thing you're doing with friends or whatever. Do some meal planning. Start with a meal plan. That makes a huge difference. Meal plan and a grocery list. That's what Oxy is putting on the Savings Ninja account on TikTok, where she's doing 2,000 calories at $4 a day. Mostly, like it's not carbless, but it's lower carb than most people eat. And if you don't know what to do to move more in this direction, just do something. You don't have to do the right thing. You just do something, and something makes a difference. And definitely, if you're interested in figuring out how to eat on $4 a day at the grocery store, check out the Savings Ninja TikTok group because she does have a couple of videos that are pretty cool. I'll try to remember to put those in the Monday mail next week, just links to them so you can check it out. I've been watching them delightedly as she does it because it's, she's put a lot of thought into this, and it's something that she is like quite good at. She does it indispensably. I'll tell you something I didn't expect. I invested quite a bit of money, and Rachel knows how much, in a Kangen machine to change the water because I felt so much healthier drinking that water. And I hadn't really dug into all the things the water can do. And one of the things the water can do, if it's not water you drink, but if I make it very acidic, or I'm sorry, very basic, very alkaline, is it can replace your laundry detergent. So I figured out it's not a lot of money. I've replaced it about $100 a year in laundry detergents that I was buying because of that machine I use for the water. And I just make the water and put it in the laundry machine with my laundry, and it's done. So now I have soapless laundry. Now I do keep some laundry detergent on hand for extra superdy duperdy, really smelly, dirty things. Sometimes you do need some soap in there, but that was a surprising, savings for me. And that's just another from scratch thing. So then we get to here, and I'm going to sneeze. I'm sorry. Like, what do you do on a podcast when you don't have a guest and you have to sneeze? You do what I just did. I'm sure that looked really awesome for those of you streaming me on video. I hope I was really big in your living room, like making that face. So, how can you start a side hustle with this? Because we got to go back to the other side of the coin, which, when you're pushing costs down, increasing the money in your pocket. Because at the end of changing these habits, what happens? Hopefully, you have more money in your pocket, which frees you up to make better decisions and do more things. So, when you think about from scratch cooking, I'm thinking about Sarah, who I talked to today, who doesn't even eat this stuff. She makes amazing cinnamon rolls and baked goods. And that was one of her ways of beating cost, right? Being frugal is making stuff like that from scratch. People liked it. So for her kids, by the way, people liked it so much that she gets orders from restaurants for cinnamon rolls. She sells at the farmer's market. She has now turned that thing that she does into an income stream that she can turn around and use to either buy things she doesn't want to do from scratch from other people who do them from scratch, or just go right back into the food budget, right? So when you learn these skills, you start having a skill that other people don't have that they want to participate in. And that just naturally opens up a side hustle. And when you start developing these skills, you'll find things you love to do and you will find things you do not love to do. I do not love to make soap. I delight in buying awesome homemade soap from people. In fact, I saw a guy complaining on the internet the other day. I can't source a soap that's made in the USA. I went and looked at the, back of the package of Dial or whatever, and it's not made here. And I was like, I know there's at least 5 soap makers in the county right now. Go buy from them. That's 100% made in the USA, right? Those cottage things are made in the USA. Okay, the third thing's going to surprise you. Prioritize health. How does that beat inflation? Anybody want to take a guess in the comments? Like, whatever it means for you, prioritizing health, how does that help you beat inflation? Anybody gonna like hazard an option? Like, if you're not getting nutrition, exercise, sleep, mental health, dental attention, like the maintenance, all of that, what does that mean when you're trying to beat inflation? See, and this goes back to when you're missing less days for work is how I make money. Yeah, if you're healthy and you miss fewer days at work, you're keeping the income side up higher, right? It's harder to tap into habits that inflation proof you if you're not feeling good. And there are lots of ways you cannot feel good. Also, you're more likely to have like a health crisis hit you all at once right in the wallet if you haven't been doing health maintenance for yourself. And the first one is that, and nobody wants to hear this, including me, Exercise is free. Exercise is free. If you have followed me on Facebook at all, you've been seeing me put up Sauce Swims videos. That's because swimming is my favorite kind of exercise and it's not free, except for it is right now where I live. There's a big lake. I can throw on a swimming suit I already own and I can go swim. I don't get as good of a workout as I do in a lap pool, but doing it in the lake is free and it's close by and I can fit it into just about every day and it's still warm enough to do it. Haas says the more healthy get more healthy and you get more stuff done. Yeah. I walk, hike a lot for my exercise. Yeah, it's free. You just got to have shoes and some people do it barefoot and don't even need shoes. So making time for exercise is totally in your control. That's what 75 Hard taught me. That was probably the most important lesson. Now, since that time, people don't love it when I prioritize exercise, but it's something I like to have in my life. And a few times this year, I've gone through a month, maybe a whole month of not getting the morning walk in or something in every day. And every time I do that, I'm like, why did I do that for so long? Because the minute I just like get up and do it, I'm fine. So that's totally in my control. It's totally in your control. Um, exercise serves you. Not getting exercise does not serve you, even though when life's hard sometimes, right? Even when you're slammed. So exercise is free and making time for exercise is completely in your control, even when you think it isn't. Even if what you're doing is squats and push-ups while you're in the waiting room somewhere and you look the fool. No, nobody cares. If people judge you for that, you don't need to know those people anyway. Homestead Made Easy says, I can go for a run and catch up on my favorite podcasts at the same time. Yep. It's a little harder to do in the lake, by the way. I haven't cracked the headset in the water net yet, though. That is in my future. Nicole, get that pool in quick. I just started PT. My pool is going in October. And I'll talk about what that decision was and how it was made and how it relates to inflation 100% as soon as we get to that part. Nutrition will reduce your bills too. So eating good food, if you are on a standard American diet, over time, because a lot of people are like, I can't eat healthy food because it's too expensive. But when you buy raw ingredients and cook from scratch, what will happen, like whatever that means for your family, whether you're baking bread, doing all the potato things, like I don't care, making chocolate chip cookies, don't care. When it's done right, it will push down your hunger because you have more nutrient dense food. And especially if you can source ingredients that are more nutrient dense than what you get at the grocery store, it pushes down your hunger over time and the bills because you eat less. And if you also cut out sugar and wheat, that actually makes a huge difference. But I'm not going to push you in that direction until that's a direction you need to decide to go. So plenty of people point out that chips, potato chips and stuff like that are cheaper than vegetables at the store and meats. But in the aggregate, are they? Because when you eat potato chips, you're not satisfied for long and then you want more potato chips. So yeah, maybe that one bag is, but if you get those other nutrient dense things into your body, and when you cut out the refined sugars and processed foods, and you start reading the ingredients of those processed foods, and by processed foods, I mean store baked bread has a bunch of crap in it, right? And you transition to whole foods, and the overall grocery bill will go down over time, especially when you start realizing where and how to source those things. And that just takes time. And the other thing is, as you make that transition, it's like you're going off something your body was addicted to. So you may have like withdrawal symptoms and crazy cravings, and you can read all sorts of ways to get through those cravings. And you may eat more volume at first of the good stuff because you've been starving your body for nutrient for decades. If you are in sort of the standard American diet situation, decades, you haven't been getting what you need to get from your food. So I don't know about you. It slows down eventually. It has slowed down for me as well, especially since I don't keep all of the bad stuff on hand. So I just don't have any of that stuff in my kitchen, and it makes a huge difference. And then like I'm lucky I can't just walk next door and buy stuff. So like if I'm gonna bake cookies, for example, which is not a thing I do Often I make great cookies when I make cookies, but if I make cookies, I eat cookies, and I don't want sugar or wheat in my particular world. So I don't keep sugar, wheat, chocolate chips, and walnuts on hand to make chocolate chip cookies. Right. So if I want to make chocolate chip cookies, I'm going to the store, I'm buying all those things, I'm making the cookies, I'm giving away as many of them as I can and having my cookies. Like my rule at home, if I want a treat, except for chocolate bar, which is actually off the list right now as we're doing a reset. Uh, I have to go do it from scratch because just buying the cookie at the store, A, the quality is worse, and B, I didn't have to put effort in. So it's like that from scratch cooking thing and nutrition thing actually work really well together. They work great together. So that's another thing. And nutrition, once you get more balanced in your gut, your brain is clearer, and then you can think about ways that you can make changes in your life to do the other side of the equation, which is increase the income. Learn herbal remedies. A lot of stuff can be handled with herbal remedies. And I don't know what's going to work for you. That's why you need to learn about them and find out. Like if I have a cough, like I'm starting to get right now from this podcast, um, well, I can go make a mullein tea before choir because I have choir tonight and make it through choir without a scratchy throat. So that's really helpful for me. Not everybody responds to mullein the way I do, though. So check out what you can do herbally, maybe work with an herbalist. That goes back to gentle, small interventions are better than like big interventions that are not needed. But if you need to tap into the, you know, wealth of knowledge from Western medicine, do what you got to do. Doctors and herbalists are, you need to have ones in your pocket and have relationships with them, ones who actually practice what I always refer to as medicine 3.0, where they're looking to help you with prevention and to actually get over things rather than just treat a symptom. Um, Creating access to care for you and your family is pretty important. And that may mean making sure your insurance is handled or your hotel share or find a direct care provider or go to an herbalist clinic and get those things set up so that they're taking care of you and or taking things on at home. Having that stuff ready to go is very helpful, especially if you're like me and you don't go see doctors. Like generally, I don't need a doctor. Every so often, I get a parasite and then I got to deal with it and my body didn't necessarily handle it, right? So then I have to like get help with that. If I don't already know people who are philosophically the way I am, you go to the doctor, they talk to you for 18 seconds, make a decision, give you a prescription that may or may not fit. And like I've been hearing from people where doctors refuse to test them for really basic things like strep throat when they have a sore throat. And they insist on it, and the doctor says no, and they don't say, "Well, please write right there in the chart that I requested a strep throat test and you refused to give it to me because in your medical opinion, it's not important to do this. You just want to put me on antibiotics right now." Yeah. The problem with our healthcare system is it's broken, but there are a lot of people working in the healthcare system who want to do the right thing. You got to find who those people are, know who they are, because if you need them, you need them. And do not ignore the mental health side of this. Good mental health equals resilience. Hard times are hard, but they're harder if you're mentally weak. So if you're having mental issues, that's okay. We talk about those all the time. Address them. It's time to start addressing them. Nutrition and exercise help with those, but they won't necessarily fix all the things from past trauma if you haven't figured out how to look forward rather than back. And you can hire a coach to help you with that. There's lots of different things you can do for mental health. But being afraid to talk about it isn't going to help you. Drowning it in alcohol isn't going to help you. And then once you get through that, how can you make a side hustle out of this? Can you be a resource for people for medical reasons? Like something that's happening organically in the Tennessee freedom cells and mags and communities that are popping up everywhere is everybody's really worried about healthcare. And they are starting to share people's names and referrals of the good kind of doctors and nurses and herbalists and acupuncturists and chiropractors and all of the physical therapists and specialists, people who actually will listen to you long enough to help assess what's going on and who look for ways to treat the problem rather than just do what their policy says you have to do, right? So can you make a side hustle out of that? I know people who have started portals because they're trying to make a side hustle out of it. And that question is a question you should be asking yourself every day. Do I want to make a side hustle out of this thing? Is there a way I can monetize this? Is there a way I can use this to make me more stable by trading my homemade bread for Nicole's coffee or my coffee for Aunt Dee's soap or whatever it is, right? So that prioritizing health thing may not seem like it's important, but it's important whether you're trying to beat inflation or just live your life and it's not an inflationary period or trying to get through civil unrest or trying to navigate a time of rapid growth of technology that you could not even really keep up with. Any of that sound familiar? Okay. Next thing is produce what you need. Your home can work for you and does not have to be a liability. It can be an asset no matter where you live. Growing food, making beer, knitting, growing fibers for things, learning how to weld stuff and produce stuff like for yourself that you need that are welded together, fixing things yourself. Find ways to do this that reduce your reliance on the cheap, just in time crap that's in the stores. You know, we always bemoan they don't make it like they used to. Well, then make it like they used to. Make it like they used to. It's very easy to grow herbs for your kitchen and have fresh, awesome herbs in a very small footprint. So if you're in a tiny place, that's a no-brainer, low-hanging fruit. If you're cooking from scratch, you can grow some herbs. And a kitchen garden is the next step up from that. A lot of people just go straight to we're going to grow lettuces and tomato. Replacing your lettuce consumption if you're a lettuce eater, big savings in rather than buying $16 a pound lettuce at the store. Way less expensive. Great way to bring that cost down. And you'll learn how to grow plants in the process, which makes you more resilient if you have to grow plants, right? This lowers the barrier to entry. This is the lowest barrier to entry that you have for starting to make your house produce for you. But there are other ways your house can produce for you. It can become a meeting center that people rent out. You can start doing backyard meats if you have the backyard. I just heard about somebody in an HOA raising rabbits for meat. Nobody knows what's going on there because they can't see it happening. Chickens for eggs or chickens for meat. Quail for eggs, quail for meat. Those are all very low barrier to entry things that can be done even if you're in an HOA. Especially if you have a garage. You just have to think about how you're doing it. And then, of course, if you're like me and you're a homesteader, you can totally expand that out bigger. But I'm talking about like what normally, like you could just decide you like poultry, you're going to do quail. Right. And they aren't loud. If you manage them right, they're not smelly. They give you eggs, they give you meat. They're very easy to reproduce. You can automate a lot of what they're doing, so it doesn't have to take a lot of your time. I think producing what you need starts by making a list of what you need. Find things that fit with your lifestyle that you can produce and that you can build into how you live your life because we all have different sucks on our time. And many people who don't have any time but are making a lot of income can actually source things from their local community, right? And figure out what works from a production standpoint for your home. But we've been taught to treat our homes as a liability rather than find a way to make it productive. And if you think about what we did a few centuries ago, homes were more productive. They just were more productive. And if you had a little bit of land, man, like off to the races, I can be really productive. And then the skills I learned doing that are exactly what I need as things change. So adjusting by just spending less isn't the only solution. And making your home produce for you is the obvious place where you got to ask yourself the question I keep asking you to ask, which is what? How do I make a side hustle out of that? If you've learned how to weld, I'm thinking about Michelle Bond right now. She welded a sheep tractor because they needed a sheep tractor to rotate their sheep. Okay. She knows how to weld. She welded a sheep tractor. Other homesteaders need sheep tractors. If she wanted to, I'm pretty sure she could make a tidy sum welding sheep tractors for people in her community who know that she can do that. I don't think she does that. I think she's focusing her time elsewhere, but that's just a no-brainer, low-hanging. So if you know how to weld, you can do a lot of welding things. Likewise, a friend of mine is a welder and he welds all sorts of stuff. And we all know that he welds, and we show up at his house and we're like, "Hey, we'll give you like $100 if you weld this." He just fixed my log splitter because a part broke off of that. And um it was very cool to be able to do that. Now, had I known how to weld, I could have saved that $100, but I've decided not to invest my time in welding. I prefer to trade coffee and money for welding, which welding that needs to be done on my roaster gets done by this person too, and he likes coffee, so that's a benefit. But any of those things you figure out how to do for yourself in your home that can be turned into a side hustle can yield money. The person who is fixing my bath right now, because y'all know that based on what happened this summer, I needed to do the bathroom faster than I was going to do the bathroom. He's a retired guy, has remodeled several of his own homes, knows how to do the things I need done, like laying tile in. So he's just doing it on his own pace. And he's making a little money doing it for me. And sometimes he gets coffee, right? So that's a side hustle. And he's retired. So that's augmenting his retirement. It's a no-brainer. Raising quail, suddenly you have eggs you can sell. You have pets you can sell. You have meat you can sell. You have compost you can sell. These things start stacking up when you start working on them. So producing that turning your home into producing for you rather than costing you money thing is one of the richest places for side hustle ideas. From scratch living is, I think, the second richest place. Now, the fifth thing, what do you guys think is missing here at this point from inflation proofing your life? I know you were hoping I was going to come here and just go through a grocery bill and tell you how to cut it in half again through from scratch cooking, right? But there's so much more to this than just that. There's so much more to this than just reducing costs. There's so much more to this than bitching about how much things cost and then looking for the best deal, which is not a bad skill to have, but best deal is relative because cheapest is not always the best. I want something that's going to last a long time if I'm going to put it in my life. Anybody going to take a guess? It's the thing I always come back to. So, somebody should be like screaming it in their car as they're listening to this audio podcast. Community. Navigating inflation without community is a lot harder because that's what gets it done. That's what gets it done. No one can do everything, but together we can do everything we need to do. And knowing that's really important. Ken has just popped in. So many ways to add income. The bigger problem is choosing. You got to go with the one that's working best for you. Ken, I actually just went through a big financial audit of everything for the last several years. And I paired it with how much time I am spending on different projects that I do. And the time, the project I spend the least time on yields the most money. And so it's very clear to me from an income standpoint that I need to put more money in on that project and less on the one that takes my most time and yields me the least income, right? It's important to look at those things, but community is what gets it done. Literally, Ken just made it so I have a door in my prepper pantry. He had an extra door sitting at his house that's now in my prepper pantry, which is great. Also, Ken, I need a pig. So if you're going to sell a pig this year, do let me know. We're finally ready to buy a pig from somebody. So on no particular rush timeline. Together we get it done. And that starts with trading and selling to each other the things we're best at. And these, like once you start getting into making your home productive or from scratch living or having a side hustle and we're talking to each other and you're like, wow, I don't want to raise pigs, but Ken raises pigs. And sometimes Ken has extra pigs and he butchers them himself and he does a really good job. Perhaps I should give Ken some of my money that I'm earning by adjusting my focus to that other 20% part of my life and buy a pig, right? There's that. Or Ken likes coffee. Maybe he'll trade part of a pig for my coffee because I really like roasting coffee. And that's because I love it, I do a good job of it. And then people who buy my coffee keep buying my coffee because they love my coffee. And I've taught them how to make coffee drinks at home so they don't have to buy it at Starbucks, which is pretty crappy coffee, actually. I used to think Starbucks was great. And then I started tasting from craft roasters and I was like, oh no. Oh no, they're not as good as I thought they were. Some people love Starbucks though, and will never do anything but Starbucks. So, yes, trade and sell with each other in your community. Two reasons that helps strengthen you because you have people you can count on for things. And when you're tapping into that community, at first you might be like, $400 for a pig, I could never do that, you know? And then you buy the $400 pig, realize that you're eating less pig. I don't know, pigs cost $400. I have no idea what a pig costs because I haven't had to buy one in a while. And I made all my bacon from scratch. And then when I eat bacon, it tastes so much better. I don't want as much and it's more nutrient dense. So I'm not eating as much. Holy crow. I'm spending less money by investing in my community, or I'm spending the same money, but those prices keep going up. And we've got this thing going on that's really working well. So Ken says, I have no pigs currently, planning to add some feeders towards the end of winter, which is a really logical time to do that. Yeah, as I said, I'm not in a rush for a pig right now. I was thinking sometime next year anyway. Okay. The other thing that having community opens up is bulk buying opportunities. So one of the big things we were talking about is like normal person, normal lifestyle. I tell them to buy half a cow and they tell me to go pound sand because they don't have anywhere to put that. They don't want to buy a giant deep freezer. That's a lot of money to put out on a cow all at one time, plus the freezer. And it's two things going on there. As you develop pantry skills, for example, you may just buy the freezer because that's part of it. And you don't have to buy the freezer on the same day you buy the cow. So you can spread those things out if it's part of your big picture plan. But if you have 5 friends, you can go in on half a cow and divide it 5 ways and it will fit in a normal freezer for you. And then a little bit later, you can go in on a half a cow. You see where I'm going with that? When you have community, you have bulk buying in groups. You can buy a whole case of chicken, which is 40 pounds, and each family take 10 pounds, for example. So that's pretty cool. Jack did a show, I think it was last week, with Josh from the Agorist group out of Chattanooga, who will be at Self-Reliance Festival. And it was all about the PMA they put together to have a shared buying situation so they can leverage what everybody's producing in their group, but also source things from outside and bring costs down and connect people with high quality food. And he talked about what episode is it? Somebody go look that up for me. It was a really good interview. And Josh is coming to Self-Reliance Festival, as is Alan Booker. And we're having a roundtable discussion on Sunday in the garage about different structures you can use for things like this that will help you avoid some of the regulations that would be in place if you were just selling like a grocery store. And it's not just about food. That's a food example, but that's going to be there. Definitely check out that interview with Josh. It was a really good one. I'm sure I'll include that in the Monday mail too. So if you're not signed up for my email, go to livingfreeintennessee.com and click on add your email address to subscribe to the email. I send an email once a week. It has past podcasts. It has a recipe of the week, has some stuff from the community. I say something and I add things like this to it that I think people will be interested in. Okay. You can do project blitzes. So you remember how I talked about making your homework for you and tapping into high value, like lumber right now is a little bit less than it was. Now you got to build the thing. Maybe you want to not hire a contractor to do that. Maybe you do want to hire Ken because he's really good. It just depends on how you want to get it done. But having that community, you'll have people with different skills and you can get stuff done, right? Episode 3522 of the Survival Podcast, thesurvivalpodcast.com. That's where you can hear that interview with Josh. Well worth listening to. You'll hear about the advent of how it happened and how they got it done. Super interesting. But project blitzes can really help you out. Likewise, as you get to know community and people have different specializations in your community, when you realize that you need to pour a concrete slab for your pool, because that's totally inflationary busting, Um, you can find somebody who's going to show you how to do it, who's good at it, who can oversee it so you do it right, and then you don't have to depend on a contractor who's booked 6 months out to pour a simple pad. Also, you don't have to mix the concrete by yourself, a bag at a time, which is not the best way to do that. Like, there's gonna be some stupid skill, like I just explained, that's specific to your situation that's gonna work out. You may be wondering, how does Nicole adding a pool to her house bust inflation? I'll tell you how. It goes back to health. My health is more important to me than a lot of material things. And when my car was totaled, I almost did finance a car to replace it. And then I realized I could just use my emergency fund and get a reasonable Toyota truck that is in good shape. And I put a little bit more into making it even in better shape. And if I was willing to spend money on a car and I was going to have to finance part of it, why wouldn't I do that for a pool where I can work out every day, even all winter long, and don't have to spend 2 hours a day driving in the winter which is 3 hours for the workout, right? Which then gives me that time back to focus on things here that yield me more money, like that 20% part of my business. And I'm a person who loves swimming. So, like, that's my gym. Um, so finally, I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna get it." And then they had 0% financing. So I always tell you to stay away from debt. And I could buy the pool mostly, but definitely by a year from now can buy the pool. And the way they trap you with this is you do the 0%, you overextend yourself, and then at the end of the year, you don't have it paid off and it goes up to credit card rates. That's not gonna happen to me because I have the money set aside for that. But I'm taking advantage of the 0% while I can, because then I keep the cash there, right? So, I decided instead of getting a car and looking cool in my car and it is more reliable in theory, the newer car, um, I would drive that truck and get the pool and prioritize my health, because then that opens me up to be more productive, which is longer term ability to earn the money for that other side of the equation on inflation. I'm not telling you to go buy an expensive pool, guys, but I am saying start thinking about the long term view and what's important, right? So, anyway, so the Project Blitz thing is for real. And I've had a lot of people helping me with a lot of projects in the last 2 years. Sometimes they come over for GSD weekends, sometimes I pay them. I've definitely hired Ken a lot to do some construction stuff because he knocks that stuff out. He does a great job. Um, Tapping into the lows when there are lows and selling when there are highs. In the 70s, my dad bought a bunch of cabling for a vineyard he was building, that he and my mom had bought 20 acres and they built a house on it. I wish they would have stayed there because that was a pretty cool spot. But they put the vineyard in and they needed cabling to like trellis all the grapes for the vineyard because that was his dream. And so he used a whole bunch of cabling for that, used it for a year or two in the vineyard, and then didn't need it anymore. And in that time, he had bought it at a low, and it was going, like, things were going through swings like this during that time. It was a high, so he was able to sell what was left for more than he paid for the cabling for the vineyard. So he tapped into a low and sold at a high. Now, I'm not saying you need to strategically go out and do that unless you're really good at that. But if you hear lumber is low and you do the research and you verify it's low and you know you're going to build a storage building for your roasting shack and you have the money, you can buy new low. Or if you keep your eye on something, like right now, used car markets, used cars are expensive, right? Like something 5 years old or newer is very close to the same cost as brand new right now for a lot of vehicles. So, and that kind of busts the myth of once you drive it off the lot, it's not worth as much, right? I'm like, well, right now it kind of is. When you add in financing, if you're going to finance, the interest rates are much higher for a used vehicle than a new one. And that brings them to within $1,000 or $2,000. And on a new vehicle, you get more warranty. So it depends on the specific vehicle, but that's how you need to start looking at that. At some point, This could not endure. At some point, I feel like the car market's going to go down. It's just really up right now for a number of reasons. And it may not, but I keep my eye on it and I keep educated on it because I am wanting a second vehicle so that if the truck's not working, I have another vehicle to drive. Right. So it's like my backup plan is two older vehicles over one vehicle, two older vehicles in a pool rather than one really nice car. That's where I'm at right now mentally for that. So, um, but community can help you get that done because you're going to have eyes from the community into the ups and the downs of prices because you can't keep your eye on everything. And that's why I love having like all of our online networks that we have because people who have an expertise in something can come in and say, metal market just went up or just went down. Now's a good time to get bolts or whatever. And then you can, decide if you believe them and go for that. Also, with community, you reduce the cost of entertainment because you can start doing free things as a community. You can have get-togethers at the lake and go swimming and barbecue that day. You can have a potluck. You can have campfire nights. You can do movie nights at somebody's house. Like all of these ways to go have fun that isn't a $5,000 vacation in the Bahamas. Not saying you shouldn't go to the Bahamas if you really want to go to the Bahamas. I'm just saying, like, one of the things that really struck me when I was talking to one of my best friends was that his grandma was older and getting close to death. And he's like, "Grandma, tell me something that's different from your youth, that from like then to today." And she said, "We used to go have fun for free. We would go for hikes. We would get together and play music or dance at somebody's house or in a barn. We would go on picnics and, let's not get into the ins and outs of you have to pay for the sandwich, like whatever." But she listed all these things that they would do for entertainment. And now she's like, now people got to buy CDs because we had music on CDs at that time, or, expensive electronics, or they go to a football game that costs them $500 for the tickets. And we did some things that cost money, but most of what we did for entertainment was free, or we get together and potluck and everybody brings a dish to share. We can recreate that now. And we can have a lot of fun doing it and get that mental health boost that you get when you have good relationships with people back to taking care of yourself. So that's another thing. You can host events and gatherings. They don't have to cost a lot. Like we get all wrapped around the axle on Pinterest, making everything look perfect. It's like, or we could all bring some hot dogs for the grill if you eat hot dogs and do that, like just make it happen. Just make it happen. So then once you have community, how can you make a side hustle out of that? How can you make a side hustle out of that? Ask yourself that question. If you do not have a side hustle that's doing well right now, you need to be asking yourself, how can I make money at this better? You need to be asking yourself, is this the right thing? And when you're doing other things that you love, you need to be asking yourself, how can I make a side hustle out of this? Otherwise, you don't eventually do the next thing, which is turn it into a business. Because once you have your own business, you open up a lot of opportunity to inflation proof yourself by paying less taxes, by tapping into the tax code that exists, earning the money, paying the expenses, then paying the taxes, rather than earning the money, paying the taxes, and then buying the things. It changes the mathematics. That's why Agorist tax advice exists, right? Like he helps you figure out how to do that, how to take advantage of that. And I didn't really hit on start your own business. I'm sure I was supposed to somewhere in here, but at some point, the income side, unless you're in a profession like, I don't know, you're a doctor and you're a specialist and you're building this whole thing based on working for somebody, there are professions where you can do that. A lot of us need to start thinking about, yes, how can I get more money long term out of what I'm doing for work? But also, how can I hedge that and have another stable source of income? Like, can you sell dollar ebooks and leverage $100 million ebooks? That's a lot. How about 100 though? Into something that's long-term ongoing recurring revenue? Maybe. Do I need to turn, like put a little camper on my property and turn it into some rental income? Maybe, maybe not. There's just lots of ways to do it. But at the end of the day, just doing what you like, going in and putting in your 40 and depending on your boss to give you an increase or promotions, even when you're doing a really good job, which means if you're doing a good job, you're putting in more than 40 probably. Um, that's not getting you through the inflation problem because income isn't like salaries are not keeping up with inflation, period. But if you're always exceeding and outperforming, then you can. That's why the people I know who are doing best are people willing to go on a like a bonus system or a results oriented salary, like in the work world. And they're usually salespeople who are like, I get 25% above this amount every time I sell. And they're doing like huge sales. Those guys are still doing well because they're still selling and because they're on performance based pay. People who are not on performance based pay because it's a lot more like stable and predictable and comfortable, they're getting like little increases and inflation's doing this. So if you're that person, don't make that scare you, but start thinking about what do I already love and what am I already doing and can I monetize that? Because when you start getting those other streams of income in, when you're at that kind of job, sometimes those turn into a full-time business for you, which is great. Like you can go all in on that then. But sometimes it just gives you enough confidence to know you're worth more. And it gives you skills that make you more attractive as an employee if you're going to keep going down an employee road. And I know a lot of people who do, and I can understand why you would. So I think inflation proofing really is a mindset thing, and it's about being resilient enough and flexible enough to ride the changes as we go through them and then realize it's not all about cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. Because most people I see giving advice on this is cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. No, you got to make more money too. You just got to make more money too. I mean, I'm in a great place because I bought this house a while ago when it was probably easier to buy a house. It wasn't easy though, and that means that I'm not subject to the same rent increases that folks who are renting are subject to. But at some point, that's got to give too, right? Like something has to give somewhere. But people I know who have been struggling with the rental market are doing. I know somebody in Camden area who just bought a camper, and she's moving out of her rental house, living in a camper. Found a place she's able to park it where she doesn't. I don't think she has a rental fee there, but maybe you could have a small rental fee if you can do that. And she's using that as her leverage to save as much as she can. She's making a pretty big sacrifice in lifestyle into a tiny living situation so that she can have more doors opened up to her in the future. And that's because she's chosen her priority. Well, that's that's one way to do it, right? What ideas do you have? Like she's inflation proofing herself to some extent because she owns that camper and where she's subject to expense on that then becomes if she needs to rent the space to put it in or needs to have relationships with people in her community to park it places, that sort of thing. And home ownership, you also have inflation. Like my insurance went up $200 or $250 a month for fire insurance for this place in 1 year, which was a lot for me. So even having that extra stability doesn't mean that you don't have increase in prices. But what you do have when you start addressing these 5 areas is that you have better health because you've prioritized your health. So it's easier for you to have the clarity of mind and the physical ability to address what needs to be done. You have skills that you've learned from scratch cooking so that when you're able to source things in bulk, maybe you know what to do with them. And that can then fold into a long-term benefit for your household budget. When you're making purchases, you already are thinking, what's my long term with this? Is this something I really need? Is this the right one? Do I want to spend a little time finding the right kind of thing and making that happen for me so I don't have to do it twice? So I keep more of my money in the pocket for an emergency if it happens. You're producing things from your home, which gives you A, some another way to make money, and B, reduces the need to spend money or earn money and pay taxes on it. And then you have a community you can tap into for advice, for support, for fun, for learning skills, for finding out trends that are happening that you can tap into and take advantage of. Because there's a lot going on right now where there's opportunity where people just don't see it because they're in the habit of looking for a different kind of opportunity. When we come across more people and perspectives, we see more opportunity. And that's why I have actually more hope now than I've had for a long time. Because while everything is changing and it's changing quickly and it's challenging and scary and it's also like people are people and there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do, and there's a lot more we can do together. Because as I said at the beginning of the community section, you can't do it all, but together you can do everything you need to do. So if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. Find out more about that at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.